The hammer fell silent in the heart of Newton, Kansas, and Gwendolyn Emerson knew something was terribly wrong because her father never stopped working unless death itself came calling. She dropped the horseshoe she had been examining and rushed into the main forge, finding her father collapsed against the anvil, his weathered hand clutching his chest, his face gray as winter ash. The doctor came and went within the hour, leaving behind bottles of medicine and a grim prognosis that changed everything. Her father, the strongest man she had ever known, had maybe a year if he was lucky, and the blacksmith shop that had served Newton since 1872 now rested entirely on her 22-year-old shoulders. That was 3 months ago in the spring of 1885, and Gwendolyn had kept the forge burning every day since. She learned quickly that most men in Newton did not trust a woman to shoe their horses, no matter how gently she worked or how perfectly she shaped each shoe. They took their business to Abilene or waited weeks for the traveling blacksmith, even though her prices were fair and her work was better. Her father watched from his chair near the window, offering guidance when she asked, but mostly just watching his life's work crumble in hands too delicate to command respect. The morning started like any other difficult day. Gwendolyn had risen before dawn to heat the forge, her arms aching from the previous day's work. She had managed to shoe exactly 3 horses all week, barely enough to pay for coal and keep food on the table. Her father's medicine was expensive, and Dr. Harrison had made it clear that without it, her father's time would be cut even shorter. She stood in the doorway of the shop, watching Newton wake up around her, and wondered how much longer she could keep pretending everything would work out. The sound of hoofbeats caught her attention. A tall man was riding down the main street on a buckskin gelding, leading a limping bay mare behind him. Even from a distance, Gwendolyn could see the mare was favoring her front left leg badly. The man dismounted in front of the general store, tied both horses, and disappeared inside. Gwendolyn watched the mare through narrowed eyes, seeing how the animal shifted her weight, how she held that hoof at an odd angle. That was more than just a thrown shoe. That was an abscess or a stone bruise, something that needed immediate attention before it got worse. She waited, hoping the man would bring the mare to her shop. Minutes passed. Then an hour. The mare stood in the hot sun, clearly uncomfortable while her owner conducted his business elsewhere. Gwendolyn's conscience would not let her stand by any longer. She grabbed her apron, told her father she would be back shortly, and walked down the dusty street toward the suffering animal. The mare nickered softly when Gwendolyn approached, her dark eyes showing white around the edges. Gwendolyn spoke in the low, soothing voice she always used with nervous horses, letting the mare smell her hand before touching her. The horse calmed almost immediately, sensing someone who understood her pain. Gwendolyn ran her hand down the mare's leg and lifted the hoof. Sure enough, a stone was wedged deep in the frog, and the surrounding area was hot and inflamed. The horse had probably been limping for days. She was so focused on examining the hoof that she did not hear the man approach until he spoke. "That's my horse you're handling." Gwendolyn looked up and had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of strong coffee. He wore the typical cowboy gear, dust-covered chaps and a hat that had seen better days, but there was something different about him. Maybe it was the way he looked at his horse with genuine concern, or maybe it was the fact that he did not immediately tell her to step away like most men would have. "Your horse has a stone lodged in her hoof," Gwendolyn said, lowering the leg gently. "It's causing an abscess. She needs it removed and the area cleaned and packed, or she'll be lame within a week." The cowboy moved closer, kneeling beside his mare and running a hand along her neck. I noticed she was limping yesterday, but I figured she just threw a shoe. How bad is it? Bad enough that she should not be standing in the sun. I can take care of it if you bring her to my shop." Gwendolyn pointed toward the blacksmith forge at the end of the street. "I'll need about an hour to do it properly." The cowboy studied her face for a long moment, and Gwendolyn braced herself for the usual response. Men typically laughed or made some comment about women not knowing horses, but this man simply nodded and gathered both sets of reins. "Lead the way, miss." They walked back to the shop together, moving slowly to accommodate the mare's limp. Gwendolyn could feel the curious stares of townspeople watching them pass. No doubt by supper time, everyone would be talking about how the Emerson girl was taking in customers now, as if that were something scandalous rather than simply business. Her father looked up with surprise when they entered the shop. Gwendolyn quickly explained the situation while she gathered her tools. The cowboy introduced himself as Graham Dalton, recently hired by the Dixon Ranch 20 miles north of Newton. He had been riding down to Wichita to pick up supplies when his mare started limping. "Dixon Ranch," her father said, his voice rough from disuse. "Good people. They've been using our services for years." "Yes, sir, Mr. Dixon speaks highly of your work," Graham said, respectful in a way that made Gwendolyn's father sit up a bit straighter. "He told me if I ever needed anything done with my horses, to come here." Gwendolyn led the mare to the work area and tied her loosely. She spent several minutes just talking to the horse, stroking her neck and letting her relax before attempting to lift the injured hoof again. Graham watched without speaking, but she could feel his attention on her, assessing her every move. "What's her name?" Gwendolyn asked, reaching for her hoof pick. "Rosie. Had her since she was a yearling, going on 8 years now." "She's a good girl," Gwendolyn murmured, more to the horse than to Graham. "We'll get you fixed up, Rosie. I promise it will feel better soon." The stone was embedded deeper than she had initially thought. Gwendolyn worked carefully, not wanting to cause more damage. Rosie tensed several times, but each time Gwendolyn paused and spoke softly until the mare relaxed again. It took nearly 20 minutes to remove the stone and clean out the infected area. Once that was done, Gwendolyn prepared a poultice of herbs and clay that her father had taught her to make. "She'll need to stay off this leg for at least 3 days," Gwendolyn said as she worked. "The abscess needs time to drain and heal. If you can keep her in a clean stall and change this packing twice a day, she should be sound within a week." 3 days, Graham repeated, and she heard the concern in his voice. "I'm supposed to be back at the ranch tomorrow with the supplies. You could ride your gelding back and leave Rosie here," Gwendolyn suggested. "We have stalls in the back. I'll take care of her until she's ready to travel." Graham was quiet for so long that Gwendolyn thought he was going to refuse. Most men would not leave their horse in the care of a woman they just met, especially not a valuable mare like Rosie. But when she looked up from her work, Graham was studying her with an expression she could not quite read. "You really know what you're doing," he said, and it was not a question. "I've been working in this forge since I could walk," Gwendolyn replied, finishing the bandage. "My father taught me everything. Horses are easier than most people think if you just pay attention to what they're telling you." Graham nodded slowly. "All right, I'll leave Rosie with you, but I'll be back tomorrow to check on her and the day after that until she's ready to travel." "That's a 40-mile round trip each day," Gwendolyn pointed out. "Seems like a lot of trouble." "Rosie's worth it," Graham said simply. "Besides, it'll give me a chance to make sure you're treating her right." There was a hint of humor in his voice that made Gwendolyn smile despite herself. "I suppose that's fair. The boarding fee is 50 cents a day, plus $2 for the treatment and supplies. That's reasonable." Graham reached into his pocket and pulled out several coins, counting them into her palm. His fingers brushed hers briefly, calloused and warm. "I'll pay for 3 days now, and we can settle the rest when she's ready." After Graham left on his gelding, Gwendolyn led Rosie to one of the back stalls. The mare followed docilely, already seeming more comfortable now that the stone was removed. Gwendolyn made sure she had fresh water and good hay, then stood for a moment just watching the horse settle in. "That young man's sweet on you," her father called from the front of the shop. Gwendolyn felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Don't be ridiculous. He just met me an hour ago." "I've been watching people for 60 years, girl. I know what I see." Her father chuckled, which turned into a cough that lasted too long. When it finally subsided, he added, "He'll be back tomorrow, just like he said. And it won't be just about the horse." Gwendolyn busied herself cleaning her tools, unwilling to admit that she hoped her father was right. Graham Dalton was handsome, certainly, but more than that, he had treated her with respect. He had not questioned her knowledge or made her feel less capable because of her gender. In her experience, that was rarer than gold. True to his word, Graham returned the next morning just after dawn. Gwendolyn was in the middle of stoking the forge when she heard his horse outside. She wiped her hands on her apron and went to meet him, trying to ignore the small flutter in her chest. "Morning," Graham said, touching the brim of his hat. "Came to check on Rosie. She had a good night." "The swelling is already going down." Gwendolyn led him back to the stalls where Rosie greeted them with a soft whinny. Graham spent several minutes examining his mare, speaking to her in the same gentle tone Gwendolyn used. She found herself watching him, noticing the careful way he moved around the horse, how he checked her over thoroughly but never roughly. "You really love her," Gwendolyn observed. "Rosie saved my life once," Graham said, not looking up from his inspection. 3 years back, I was riding through a canyon in Colorado when a rattlesnake spooked my gelding. He threw me and ran off. I was knocked silly, probably had a concussion. Rosie here, she was just a green broke 4-year-old at the time, but she stayed with me. Stood over me all night while I was barely conscious, kept the predators away. By morning I was clear-headed enough to ride, and she got me back to the ranch. Been inseparable ever since. The story touched something deep in Gwendolyn's chest. She thought about all the horses she had worked with over the years, how each one had its own personality and intelligence that most people never took the time to notice. Graham saw it, though. He understood. "That makes her pretty special," Gwendolyn said softly. "That she is." Graham finally straightened up, seeming satisfied with Rosie's condition. "You've done good work here. The swelling really is down, and she's putting more weight on the leg. I'll change the packing this afternoon. By tomorrow she should be sound enough for light walking." They stood there in the quiet stable, morning light filtering through the boards, dust motes dancing in the air between them. Gwendolyn knew she should say something, send him on his way so she could get back to work, but the words would not come. Graham seemed similarly reluctant to leave. "I should probably get back to the ranch," he finally said. "But I was wondering, would it be all right if I came by this evening, after supper, just to check on Rosie again?" "You can check on her any time you like," Gwendolyn said. "That's part of the boarding service. Good, that's good." Graham smiled, and it transformed his entire face from merely handsome to something that made Gwendolyn's breath catch. "I'll see you this evening then, Miss Emerson." "Gwendolyn," she said impulsively. "You can call me Gwendolyn." "Gwendolyn," he repeated, as if testing how her name felt in his mouth. "I'm Graham. Just Graham, not Mr. Anything." After he left, Gwendolyn found herself smiling for no particular reason as she worked. Her father noticed, of course, but he had the good grace not to comment beyond a knowing look that said more than words could have. The rest of the day crawled by. Gwendolyn shoed one horse for a farmer who looked skeptical the entire time, but could not argue with her work when she was finished. She repaired a broken gate hinge for the mercantile and straightened 3 bent nails for old Mrs. Patterson, who refused to buy new ones. It was not much, but it was work, and right now she needed every penny. As evening approached, Gwendolyn found herself checking her reflection in the small mirror that hung near the water pump. She looked like she always did after a day in the forge, smudged with soot, her dark blonde hair escaping from its braid, her simple work dress stained and worn. There was no point in trying to pretty herself up. Graham was coming to see his horse, nothing more, but when she heard hoofbeats as the sun was setting, her heart still sped up traitorously. Graham dismounted and walked into the shop, his hat in his hands, looking almost nervous. Gwendolyn realized he had washed up and changed his shirt. The realization sent a warm flutter through her stomach. "Evening, Gwendolyn," he said. "I hope I'm not coming by too late." "Not at all. I was just about to change Rosie's packing. You can help if you'd like." They worked together in the stable, Gwendolyn explaining what she was doing and why, while Graham held Rosie steady and asked intelligent questions. The mare was clearly improving, bearing weight on the injured hoof with much less hesitation. When they were finished, Graham did not immediately leave. Instead, he leaned against the stall door and looked at Gwendolyn with an expression that was part curiosity, part something else she was afraid to name. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Of course. Why are you running this forge?" "I mean, I can see you're good at it, better than most blacksmiths I've met. But this isn't easy work for anyone, let alone a woman." Gwendolyn had been asked variations of this question 100 times, usually with judgment heavy in the words. But Graham sounded genuinely curious, so she told him the truth. She explained about her father's illness, about how she had grown up in the forge and learned the trade because it fascinated her, about how most of Newton's residents would rather travel to another town than trust her with their horses. "That's their loss," Graham said when she finished. "And their horses lost too. I've been around smiths all my life, and I've never seen anyone handle a horse as gently as you do. Most blacksmiths treat shoeing like it's a battle to be won. You treat it like a conversation. Horses respond better to kindness than force," Gwendolyn said. "I learned that young. My father, he's strong enough to muscle a horse into submission if he has to, but he taught me there's a better way. Maybe that's because I've never been strong enough to force anything, so I had to learn the gentle approach." "Maybe that's exactly why you're better at it," Graham replied. They talked as darkness fell, about horses and ranching and life in Kansas. Graham had grown up in Missouri, worked cattle drives in his late teens, and eventually settled into steady ranch work. He had been at the Dixon Ranch for 2 years now and liked it well enough, though he admitted he sometimes dreamed of having his own place someday. Gwendolyn told him about growing up in Newton, about her mother who had died when she was 12, about her love of working with metal and fire despite everyone telling her it was not appropriate for a lady. "Appropriate is overrated," Graham said, and Gwendolyn laughed, a real laugh that felt good after so many months of worry. When Graham finally left, well after dark, he paused at the door of the shop and turned back. "I'll see you tomorrow." "I'll be here," Gwendolyn said, and she realized she was looking forward to it more than she wanted to admit. The next day followed a similar pattern. Graham arrived in the morning to check on Rosie, stayed to talk with Gwendolyn while she worked, and then returned in the evening. By the 3rd day, Rosie was sound enough to travel, but Graham did not take her. Instead, he paid for another 3 days of boarding, claiming he wanted to be absolutely sure she was fully healed before making the long ride back to the ranch. Gwendolyn did not argue. She told herself it was because she needed the money, but deep down she knew it was because she was not ready for Graham to leave. He had become part of her daily routine, something to look forward to in days that had previously held only struggle and worry. They talked about everything and nothing, comfortable in a way that felt like they had known each other for years rather than days. On the fifth evening, Graham helped her close up the forge for the night. They worked in companionable silence, banking the coals and putting away tools. When everything was secure, they walked Rosie out to the small corral behind the shop so she could stretch her legs in the cool evening air. The horse trotted a small circle, moving completely sound, her tail held high. "She's ready," Gwendolyn said, watching the mare. "You could take her home tomorrow." "I know," Graham said quietly. He was standing close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "Gwendolyn, I need to ask you something, and I want you to know I'll understand if the answer is no." Her heart started beating faster. "All right. I know we haven't known each other long. Just about a week. And I know this is going to sound crazy, but I can't stop thinking about you. About how you are with the horses, about how you talk about your work, about how you keep going even when this whole town is making it hard for you." He turned to face her fully, his expression earnest in the fading light. "I'm falling in love with you, Gwendolyn. Maybe I already have fallen. And I know it's too soon and I have no right to ask, but would you consider letting me court you properly?" Gwendolyn's breath caught. She had been thinking the same things, feeling the same impossible feelings, but she had convinced herself she was being foolish. Men did not fall in love in a week. Women did not develop deep feelings for cowboys they barely knew. Except apparently they did, because her heart was saying yes before her mind could list all the reasons why this was impractical. "I'd like that," she said, and her voice came out barely above a whisper. "I'd like that very much." Graham's face broke into that transformative smile that made her knees weak. "Really? You mean it?" "I mean it. Though I have to warn you, courting me isn't going to be easy. I work long hours, and I'm going to keep running this forge whether the town approves or not. I won't give up my work for anyone." "I wouldn't want you to," Graham said. "Your work is part of who you are. It's one of the things I love about you." He took her hand, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. It was a simple touch, completely appropriate, but it sent warmth flooding through her entire body. They stood there in the corral, Rosie grazing peacefully nearby, while the sky turned from gold to purple overhead. "I should probably tell you something too," Gwendolyn said. "I'm not like other girls in Newton. I don't sew very well, I'm a terrible cook, and I'd rather spend my time in a forge than at a church social. If you're looking for a traditional wife, I'm going to disappoint you. Gwendolyn Emerson, I don't want a traditional wife. I want you, exactly as you are." Graham squeezed her hand gently. "Though I should probably warn you that I'm no prize either. I don't own much beyond my horses and my gear. My prospects are just what I can earn from ranch work. If you're looking for security and comfort, I'm probably not the best choice." "I'm not looking for security," Gwendolyn said. "I'm looking for a partner, someone who sees me as an equal, not as something to be managed or changed. Then I think we might be perfect for each other." They stood there smiling at each other like fools until Gwendolyn's father called from the shop, asking if everything was all right. Reluctantly, they separated, though Graham promised to return the next day. As Gwendolyn watched him ride away, she felt something she had not experienced in months. Hope. The following weeks fell into a pattern that felt both exciting and comfortable. Graham still worked at the Dixon Ranch, but he came to Newton every Sunday, which was his day off. They would spend the morning together while Gwendolyn did the minimal work required on the Lord's Day, then walk through town or ride out to the creek that ran east of Newton. Graham was always respectful, never pushing for more than she was ready to give. But the attraction between them grew with each meeting. Word spread quickly through Newton about Gwendolyn's courtship. Some people were scandalized, claiming it was improper for her to be courting while running a business. Others thought Graham was a fool for wasting his time on a woman who worked like a man. But there were a few, like the Dixon family and Dr. Harrison's wife, who thought it was romantic and supported the match. The one person whose opinion Gwendolyn truly cared about was her father. She worried he might think Graham was moving too fast or taking advantage of their situation. But her father seemed genuinely pleased. Graham always greeted him respectfully, asked his advice on various matters, and listened attentively when the old blacksmith told stories about the early days of Newton. "He's a good man," her father told Gwendolyn one evening after Graham had left. "Reminds me of myself at that age. Got nothing but his honor and his work ethic, but those are worth more than gold when it comes right down to it." "You really like him?" Gwendolyn asked. "I do. More importantly, he makes you happy." "I haven't seen you smile this much since before your mother passed." Her father's expression grew serious. "Gwendolyn, I need you to listen to me. When I'm gone, this forge is yours. I've already talked to the lawyer and had the papers drawn up. But I don't want you to feel obligated to keep it running if it's making you miserable." "Papa, don't talk like that." "Hush now, let me finish. I'm dying, sweetheart. We both know it. And before I go, I need to make sure you're going to be all right." He reached out and took her hand. "If Graham asks you to marry him, and if you want to say yes, you say yes. Don't let this forge hold you back from happiness. You can sell it, close it, or keep running it. Whatever makes sense for your life. But don't sacrifice love for a pile of bricks and some tools." Gwendolyn's eyes filled with tears. "This forge is your life's work." "No, you are my life's work. The forge is just a building. You are my legacy. And I want that legacy to be a happy woman with a good life, not a lonely blacksmith working herself to death to preserve something that doesn't matter near as much as she does." They did not speak of it again, but the conversation stayed with Gwendolyn. She found herself watching Graham more carefully, trying to imagine a future with him. It was not hard. He fit into her life so naturally that sometimes she forgot they had known each other for less than 2 months. He brought her coffee when she was working late. He helped shoe difficult horses without being asked. He made her laugh when she was tired and listened when she needed to talk. Summer turned toward fall, and the weather remained hot and dry. The forge was brutal to work in during the afternoon, but Gwendolyn pushed through because she needed the money. Her father's condition was deteriorating slowly but steadily. Some days he could barely get out of bed. The medicine helped, but Dr. Harrison had gently reminded her that it was only delaying the inevitable. One particularly hot September afternoon, Gwendolyn was working on shoeing a difficult stallion when the owner started complaining about her technique. The man had only brought his horse to her because the blacksmith in Abilene was sick, and he made no secret of his dissatisfaction. He criticized everything, from the way she held the horse's leg to the angle of the nails. Gwendolyn bit her tongue and continued working, determined to prove herself through the quality of her work. She was finishing the 4th shoe when the stallion suddenly reared, spooked by something. Gwendolyn was knocked backward and landed hard on the ground. The horseshoe she had been holding flew from her hand and struck her temple. For a moment everything went dark and spinning. When her vision cleared, Graham was there, kneeling beside her with panic written across his face. She did not know when he had arrived, but she had never been so glad to see anyone. He helped her sit up slowly, his hands gentle but shaking slightly. "Don't move too fast," he said. "You hit your head pretty hard." "I'm all right," Gwendolyn insisted, though her head was pounding. "The horse." "The owner took him. I finished the last shoe." Graham's jaw was tight. That man should never have brought a stallion that green to be shoed without proper restraints. He's lucky you weren't hurt worse. "It's part of the job," Gwendolyn said, trying to stand. The world tilted alarmingly and Graham caught her. "That's it. You're done for today." His tone left no room for argument. "Let me get your father settled and then I'm taking you to see the doctor." Gwendolyn was too dizzy to protest. Graham helped her into the house, got her father comfortable with water and his medicine nearby, then practically carried her to Dr. Harrison's office. The doctor examined her thoroughly and declared she had a mild concussion and needed rest. "No working in the forge for at least 3 days, Dr. Harrison said firmly. "I mean it, Miss Emerson. You need to let your head heal." "But I have customers coming," Gwendolyn protested weakly. "I'll take care of it," Graham said. "I know enough about shoeing to handle basic work, and anything complicated can wait until you're better." "You can't do that. You have your own job." "I'll talk to Mr. Dixon. He'll understand." Graham's expression was set in determined lines. "You're more important than a few days of ranch work." And he did exactly that. For the next 3 days, Graham ran the forge while Gwendolyn rested and recovered. He rode to the Dixon ranch early each morning to feed the horses and do the most essential chores, then came to Newton and worked in her forge until evening. He shoed 4 horses, repaired several tools, and even managed to fix a broken wagon wheel. When Gwendolyn protested that he was doing too much, he simply kissed her forehead and told her to rest. It was during those 3 days that Gwendolyn realized she loved him completely. Not just the attraction and affection she had been feeling, but deep, soul-level love. This man had come into her life barely 2 months ago, and now she could not imagine her life without him. When she finally returned to work, Graham was waiting at the forge with Rosie and his gelding both saddled. "You're feeling better?" he asked. "Much better, thanks to you." "Good. Because I'm taking you somewhere and I won't take no for an answer." "Graham, I have work to do. It's Sunday. The work can wait." He helped her onto Rosie's back, insisting his mare was the gentler ride. Then he mounted his gelding and led them out of Newton, heading east toward the creek. They rode in comfortable silence, the late September air finally holding a hint of autumn coolness. When they reached the creek, Graham dismounted and helped Gwendolyn down. He had packed a picnic in his saddlebags, simple food but more than enough. They sat on a blanket near the water and ate while the horses grazed nearby. "Gwendolyn," Graham said when they had finished eating, "I've been thinking about something." "That sounds ominous," she teased, but her heart had started beating faster. "I've been thinking about the future. About what I want and where I'm going." He took her hand, his thumb tracing patterns on her palm. 2 months ago, I was just a cowboy working a ranch, saving money with some vague idea of maybe buying my own place someday. I didn't think much beyond the next paycheck. And now? Gwendolyn asked softly. "Now all I think about is you, about building a life together, about waking up next to you every morning and working side by side every day." He took a deep breath. "I know this is fast. I know we haven't known each other long. But I've never been more certain of anything in my life." Graham reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Gwendolyn's breath caught as he opened it, revealing a simple gold band with a small diamond. It was not fancy or expensive, but it was beautiful. "This was my grandmother's ring," Graham said. "The only thing of value my mother had to pass down to me. I've been carrying it for years, waiting until I found the right woman." He looked up at her, his brown eyes earnest and vulnerable. "Gwendolyn Emerson, I love you. I love your strength and your gentleness, your determination and your kindness. I love how you talk to horses and how you never give up even when everything is hard. I love every single thing about you. Will you marry me?" Tears were streaming down Gwendolyn's face, but she was smiling through them. "Yes," she said. "Yes, absolutely yes." Graham's whoop of joy startled the horses. He slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. Then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her properly for the first time. It was sweet and passionate and full of promise, and Gwendolyn felt like her heart might burst from happiness. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Graham rested his forehead against hers. "I want to do this right," he said. "I know your father is sick, and I know you need to keep the forge running. So here's what I'm thinking. I'll give my notice at the Dixon Ranch. It'll take about a month to train someone to replace me. During that time, I'll save every penny I can. Then I'll move to Newton and we'll get married. I'll help you run the forge, and together we'll make it successful. We'll take care of your father for however long he has, and after that, we'll figure out what comes next, together." "You'd give up your ranch job to be a blacksmith?" Gwendolyn asked. "I'd give up anything to be with you," Graham said simply. "Besides, I've always been good with metalwork, and I can still take on ranch work when things are slow at the forge. We'll make it work, Gwendolyn. I promise you that." They stayed by the creek until sunset, making plans and dreaming about the future. When they rode back to Newton, Gwendolyn's heart felt lighter than it had in years. Her father took one look at her face and started grinning. "I take it congratulations are in order?" he asked. "He asked me to marry him, Papa," Gwendolyn said, holding out her hand to show the ring. Her father beckoned Graham over and shook his hand firmly. "You take care of my girl, you hear me? She's the best thing I ever did with my life." "I know, sir." "I promise I'll spend every day proving I'm worthy of her. See that you do." But her father was smiling, and when he hugged Gwendolyn, she felt him trembling with emotion. "Your mother would have loved him," he whispered in her ear. "She would have been so happy for you." The next month passed in a blur of preparation and bittersweet moments. Graham gave his notice at the Dixon Ranch, and Mr. Dixon was understanding and generous, giving him a bonus and wishing him well. Graham spent his days off in Newton, helping Gwendolyn at the forge and slowly moving his belongings into the small room above the shop that would become their home after the wedding. Word of their engagement spread through Newton, bringing mixed reactions. Some people thought it was romantic, others thought it was foolish, and a few muttered that no good would come of a woman blacksmith marrying a poor cowboy. But Gwendolyn and Graham did not care what anyone else thought. They were building something together, something real and strong. Gwendolyn's father's health continued to decline. There were days when he could barely leave his bed, and Dr. Harrison quietly told Gwendolyn that it would likely be a matter of weeks rather than months. She wanted to postpone the wedding, but her father would not hear of it. "I want to see you married before I go," he said firmly. "That's the one thing I'm asking for, Gwendolyn. Let me walk you down that aisle and give you away properly. Let me see you happy and settled before I close my eyes for the last time." So they set the date for the last Sunday in October. It would be a simple ceremony in the small church on the edge of Newton, with just a handful of guests. Gwendolyn did not have many friends in town, and Graham's only family was in Missouri and could not make the trip on such short notice. But none of that mattered. What mattered was the commitment they were making to each other. The morning of the wedding was crisp and clear, perfect autumn weather. Gwendolyn dressed in her mother's wedding gown, which she had carefully altered to fit. It was simple white cotton with lace at the collar, nothing fancy but beautiful in its simplicity. Her father got dressed in his best suit, which hung loosely on his diminished frame, but he stood tall and proud when it was time to leave for the church. The ceremony was everything Gwendolyn had hoped for. Her father walked her down the aisle without faltering, though she could feel him leaning on her arm for support. Graham stood at the front of the church looking impossibly handsome in a new suit he had saved up to buy. His eyes never left her face as she approached. The minister kept the ceremony short and sweet. They exchanged vows in strong, clear voices, promising to love and honor each other through whatever life brought. When Graham slipped the matching gold band onto her finger, Gwendolyn felt a sense of completeness she had never known before. And when the minister pronounced them husband and wife and told Graham he could kiss his bride, the kiss they shared was full of joy and promise and infinite possibilities. The small gathering of guests applauded. Mr. and Mrs. Dixon had come, along with Dr. Harrison and his wife, old Mrs. Patterson, and a handful of others who had supported Gwendolyn's forge over the difficult months. It was not a large celebration, but it was filled with genuine warmth. They held a small reception at the forge. Mrs. Dixon had made a cake, and several other ladies had contributed food. Gwendolyn's father sat in his favorite chair and watched the festivities with a smile on his face that never dimmed. At one point, he called Graham over and spoke to him privately for several minutes. Gwendolyn watched, curious, but when Graham returned to her side, he simply kissed her temple and said her father had given him some advice about marriage that he intended to take to heart. As evening fell and the guests began to leave, Gwendolyn helped her father back to his bed. He was exhausted but happier than she had seen him in months. "Thank you, Papa," she said, tucking the blankets around him. "Thank you for walking me down the aisle." "Wouldn't have missed it for the world, sweetheart." He patted her hand weakly. "You look just like your mother did on our wedding day, beautiful and strong and ready to take on the world." His eyes drifted closed. "I can rest now, knowing you're not alone anymore. Knowing someone will take care of you the way you deserve. I love you, Papa. Love you too, my girl. So much." Gwendolyn sat with him until he fell asleep, then joined Graham in the room that was now officially theirs. They spent their wedding night talking and planning, and simply being together. No rush or pressure. Just two people beginning their life as one. Her father passed away peacefully in his sleep 3 days later. Gwendolyn found him in the morning when she brought his breakfast. He looked peaceful, almost smiling, and somehow she knew he had held on just long enough to see her settled and happy. The grief was profound, but it was softened by gratitude that he had lived to see her wedding and by the comfort of having Graham beside her through it all. They buried her father in the Newton cemetery next to her mother. The funeral was simple, but well attended. Many people came who had used his services over the years, paying their respects to a man who had served the community faithfully for decades. Graham stood beside Gwendolyn throughout, his presence a steady anchor in her storm of grief. In the weeks following the funeral, Gwendolyn threw herself into work. Graham worked beside her, learning quickly and proving to be a natural at the forge. He had strong hands and a good eye for detail, and horses responded to him the same way they responded to her, with trust and calm. Together, they made a formidable team. Slowly, business began to improve. People who had been skeptical about a woman blacksmith were willing to give the married couple a chance. Graham's presence seemed to legitimize the operation in the eyes of men who would never have trusted Gwendolyn alone, which was irritating but pragmatic. Gwendolyn did most of the actual shoeing while Graham handled the heavy forge work and difficult horses. They developed a rhythm that worked for both of them. Winter came to Kansas with its typical harshness. The forge was brutally cold in the mornings and overheated in the afternoons. Money was still tight, but they were making enough to keep the business running and put a little aside. Graham took on occasional ranch work when things were slow, and Gwendolyn continued to build her reputation as the gentlest horse handler in the county. On Christmas morning, Gwendolyn woke to find Graham already up and stoking the fire in their room. He came back to bed and pulled her into his arms, his warmth chasing away the winter chill. "Merry Christmas, wife," he murmured against her hair. "Merry Christmas, husband." Gwendolyn smiled and burrowed closer. "This is the best Christmas I've ever had. Even though we're too poor to give each other anything fancy, especially because of that, we have everything that matters. We have each other, we have work we're good at, and we have a future to build together." She tilted her face up to kiss him. "I don't need anything else." But Graham had still managed to surprise her with a small gift, a beautiful leather apron specifically designed for smithing with her initials tooled into the leather. She loved it and wore it every day. Her gift to him was a new set of tools for working with horses, saved for penny by penny over the past months. As winter turned to spring, Gwendolyn realized she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with a complex mix of emotions. Joy, certainly, and excitement about starting a family with Graham, but also worry about how she would manage the physical demands of forge work as her pregnancy progressed, and concern about their finances with a baby coming. Graham's reaction was pure, unfiltered happiness. He picked her up and spun her around despite her protests, laughing and whooping like a man who had just struck gold. When he finally set her down, his eyes were suspiciously bright. "We're going to be parents," he said wonderingly. "You're going to be a mother and I'm going to be a father. Gwendolyn, this is the best news I've ever gotten in my life." His joy was contagious. Gwendolyn found her worries fading in the face of his enthusiasm. They would figure it out together, just like they figured out everything else. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Gwendolyn worked in the forge as long as she could, though she had to adjust her techniques as her belly grew. Graham took over more of the heavy work and the difficult horses, insisting that Gwendolyn focus on the detailed finishing work that required less physical strain. Their customers were surprisingly understanding, and several women in town who had previously been standoffish began stopping by to offer advice and hand-me-down baby clothes. In late September of 1886, just over a year after Graham had first brought Rosie into her forge, Gwendolyn gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Marcus, after her father. The birth was long and difficult, but Dr. Harrison was skilled and patient, and eventually Gwendolyn held her son in her arms and felt her heart expand in ways she had never imagined possible. Graham was besotted with his son from the first moment. He held Marcus with such tenderness and awe that it brought tears to Gwendolyn's eyes. In the quiet hours of the night when the baby needed feeding or changing, Graham was always there, helping and supporting and marveling at the tiny person they had created together. Being parents changed them in ways both challenging and beautiful. The forge had to be managed around feeding schedules and nap times. Money was even tighter with another mouth to feed. Sleep became a precious commodity they both desperately craved. But watching Graham play with Marcus, seeing the absolute love in his eyes when he looked at their son, made every difficult moment worthwhile. Marcus grew from a tiny infant into a curious baby, then a toddling child with his father's brown eyes and his mother's determination. He spent his days in the forge, playing safely in a corner while his parents worked. From the beginning, he was fascinated by the horses, reaching out his chubby hands and gurgling with delight when they nuzzled him gently. As Marcus grew, so did the business. Word spread about the blacksmith shop in Newton, where horses were handled with exceptional gentleness and skill. People started coming from towns 20 and 30 miles away specifically to have Gwendolyn and Graham shoe their horses. They hired a young man named Thomas to help with the heavy work, which allowed them to take on more customers. 3 years after Marcus was born, Gwendolyn found herself pregnant again. This time there was less worry and more excitement. They knew what to expect, and their business was finally successful enough that they could afford to slow down a bit during the pregnancy. Their daughter, Clara, was born in the spring of 1890, a tiny thing with her mother's blonde hair and a temperament that was somehow both fierce and gentle. Life settled into a rhythm that felt right. Gwendolyn and Graham ran the forge together, their children growing up surrounded by the sounds of hammer on anvil and the soft snorts of horses. Marcus, at 4 years old, was already showing an aptitude for working with animals. Clara, though only a baby, seemed to be developing her mother's stubborn determination. On Sunday afternoons when the forge was closed, they would often ride out to the creek where Graham had proposed. The spot had become special to them, a place to escape the demands of work and simply be together as a family. They would have picnics and let the children play in the shallow water while they talked about their dreams for the future. "You ever regret it?" Gwendolyn asked one afternoon as they watched Marcus try to catch minnows. Giving up ranch work to be a blacksmith, Graham pulled her closer against his side. "Not for a single second. This life, right here with you and our children, is everything I ever wanted even before I knew I wanted it. Even when money is tight and the work is hard, especially then, because we're doing it together." He kissed the top of her head. "You know what I realized the other day? When I first brought Rosie to your forge, I told myself I was just being practical. She needed care and you were there. But looking back, I think some part of me knew even then that you were going to change my life." Gwendolyn smiled against his shoulder. "I remember thinking you were the first man in Newton who treated me like I actually knew what I was doing. That's because you did know what you were doing. You knew better than anyone." Graham shifted so he could look at her face. "You still do. This business we've built, it's successful because of your skill and your vision. I'm just the muscle. You're much more than that and you know it." Gwendolyn poked him gently in the ribs. "We're partners in every sense of the word. Equal partners." "Equal partners," Graham agreed. "Always." As the years passed, their family and business continued to grow. Marcus did indeed develop into an exceptional horseman with his mother's gentle touch. By the time he was 10, he was helping in the forge regularly and showed every sign of carrying on the family business someday. Clara, at 6 years old, was more interested in the metalwork itself, fascinated by how fire and hammer could transform raw iron into useful objects. In 1896, Gwendolyn gave birth to their third and final child, another boy they named James. By this time, the forge was so successful that they had expanded, adding a second building and hiring 3 full-time employees. They were no longer struggling to make ends meet, but were actually prospering, well-respected members of the Newton community. The business that had once been dismissed because it was run by a woman was now known throughout Kansas as the best place to have your horse shoed. People specifically requested Gwendolyn because she had developed techniques that made the process easier on the horses. She had even started teaching classes for other blacksmiths who wanted to learn her methods. Graham became known as one of the finest metal workers in the region. He had discovered a talent for ornamental ironwork and started taking commissions for gates and railings and decorative pieces. The combination of Gwendolyn's horseshoeing and Graham's metalwork made their forge a cornerstone of Newton's economy. But through all the success and growth, they never forgot what mattered most. Every Sunday, they closed the forge and spent the day as a family. They still had picnics at the creek when weather allowed. They made sure their children knew they were loved and valued for who they were, not for what they could produce or achieve. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Graham surprised Gwendolyn by commissioning a new sign for the forge. Instead of the simple Emerson blacksmith that had hung there for decades, The new sign read Emerson and Dalton Family Forge. When he showed it to her, Gwendolyn cried tears of joy. "We built this together," Graham said, wrapping his arms around her. "Your name and mine, side by side, just like we've been from the start." "I love you," Gwendolyn said, looking up at him with eyes that held a decade of shared joys and sorrows, challenges and triumphs. "I love you more now than I did the day you proposed." "That's good," Graham replied with a smile, "because I love you more than I did yesterday, and I'll love you even more tomorrow." The children grew and the business flourished. Marcus, at 18, was preparing to take over more of the day-to-day operations. Clara, at 14, had decided she wanted to be a metal worker like her father and was apprenticing in the ornamental side of the business. Young James, at 6, was still finding his way but showed promise in all aspects of the forge work. In the summer of 1903, Marcus announced he was planning to marry a young woman named Sarah from a neighboring town. She was kind and sensible, the daughter of a rancher, and she loved horses as much as the Dalton family did. The wedding was a joyous occasion that brought together people from all over Kansas, a testament to how far the family had come from those early struggling days. Gwendolyn watched her son get married and felt the circle of life completing itself. She thought about her own father, how he had lived just long enough to see her settled and happy. She thought about those difficult months when she had been running the forge alone, wondering if she would lose everything. And she thought about the day a cowboy had brought his mare in for treatment, and somehow, improbably, that simple transaction had turned into the greatest love story of her life. That evening, after the wedding festivities had ended and the guests had departed, Gwendolyn and Graham sat on the porch of their home. The forge building stood quiet in the moonlight, solid and successful. 3 children were sleeping soundly in their beds, with Marcus starting his own married life in a house nearby. Everything they had worked for, everything they had built together, was secure and thriving. "What are you thinking about?" Graham asked, taking her hand in his. "Everything," Gwendolyn said. "How far we've come, how lucky I am, how that day you brought Rosie to me changed my entire life. Rosie's in the pasture right now, you know. She's 26 years old and still going strong." Gwendolyn smiled. "That mare brought me everything good in my life. She brought me you." "I like to think we brought each other what we needed," Graham said. "You needed someone who saw your worth and your strength. I needed someone who made me want to be better, to build something lasting." He squeezed her hand. "We've had a good life, haven't we?" "The best life," Gwendolyn confirmed, "and it's not over yet. We still have years ahead of us. Years of working together in the forge. Years of watching our children build their own lives. Years of growing old together." Graham pulled her close. "I can't wait for all of it." They sat in comfortable silence, 2 people who had started as strangers and become something so much more. Partners in work and in life, lovers and best friends, a team that had overcome every obstacle and built something beautiful together. Inside the house, baby James stirred and called out. Gwendolyn started to rise, but Graham stopped her. "I'll get him. You rest." She watched him go into the house, this man who had kept every promise he had ever made to her, who had stood beside her through grief and joy, through struggle and success, who loved her as fiercely today as he had 18 years ago when he proposed by the creek. Graham returned a few minutes later, James settled and sleeping again. He sat back down beside Gwendolyn and put his arm around her shoulders. Above them, the Kansas stars shone brilliantly, the same stars that had watched over them since the beginning. "Thank you," Gwendolyn said softly. "For what?" "For everything. For seeing me when no one else did, for loving me exactly as I am, for building this life with me." "Gwendolyn Dalton, I should be thanking you. You gave me purpose and family and a home. You gave me everything." Graham kissed her temple, a gesture so familiar and comfortable it felt like coming home. "I'd bring that mare to your forge 1,000 times over if it meant ending up right here." "Just once was enough," Gwendolyn said with a laugh. "Once was perfect." They remained on the porch until late into the night, talking and dreaming the way they had always done. The forge would open again tomorrow, and there would be horses to shoe and metal to work, and 100 small tasks that required attention. Their children would need guidance and support as they found their own paths. Life would continue with all its demands and rewards. But tonight was just for them, for remembering and celebrating and appreciating the improbable love story that had begun with a limping mare and a gentle touch. Years continued to pass, each one adding new layers to their story. Clara married a metalworker she met at a trade show in Wichita, and they opened a second forge in Abilene, expanding the family business. James discovered a talent for training horses and started a breeding program that became renowned throughout Kansas. Marcus and Sarah had 4 children who all showed interest in various aspects of the family trade. Gwendolyn and Graham gradually stepped back from the daily operation of the forge, though they never fully retired. Even in their 50s and 60s, they could be found in the workshop most days. Gwendolyn patiently teaching a grandchild the proper way to handle a nervous horse, Graham showing another how to work with heated metal. Their expertise was invaluable, their presence a foundation that the entire operation was built upon. On their 30th anniversary, the family threw them a celebration that seemed to include half of Newton. People came from across Kansas to honor the couple who had built not just a successful business but a legacy of quality and integrity. There were speeches and toasts, stories and laughter, and through it all, Gwendolyn and Graham sat hand in hand, amazed at the life they had created together. "Who would have thought," Gwendolyn said to Graham as they danced together at the celebration, "that day you walked into my forge we would end up here?" "I think part of me knew even then," Graham replied. "Maybe not consciously, but something in my soul recognized something in yours." "We were meant for this, Gwendolyn, meant for each other and for this life we built." "I never believed in fate before I met you," Gwendolyn admitted, "but I can't explain us any other way. You appeared exactly when I needed you most, and somehow you needed me just as much." "I needed you more," Graham insisted with a smile. "I was just a cowboy with nothing but a horse and a dream. You were already strong and capable and amazing. I just got lucky enough that you saw something worth loving in me." "I saw everything worth loving in you," Gwendolyn corrected. "Your kindness, your strength, your integrity. The way you treated your horse like family. The way you treated me like an equal from the very first moment. You gave me respect when the rest of the world was determined to dismiss me. That meant everything." They danced until the music stopped and the guests began to depart. Their children and grandchildren hugged them goodnight, each one a testament to the love that had started with a simple act of kindness toward a limping mare. As they walked home through the quiet Newton streets, past the forge that bore both their names, Gwendolyn felt a deep sense of contentment. This was what happiness looked like. Not a single grand gesture or perfect moment, but thousands of small moments accumulated over years. Every shared sunrise and whispered conversation. Every challenge faced together and victory celebrated. Every ordinary day made extraordinary by the presence of the person you loved most. The years that followed were gentler, slower. Gwendolyn and Graham spent their days working when they felt like it, traveling when they wanted to see new places, and mostly just enjoying the family they had built. They took great joy in their 8 grandchildren, each one unique and precious. They watched the business continue to grow under Marcus and Clara's leadership, expanding to 3 locations across Kansas. When Gwendolyn was 71, she had a health scare that reminded them both that time was finite. She recovered fully, but the experience made them appreciate each day even more. They started making a point to say, "I love you" more often, to not let small disagreements linger, to prioritize time together over everything else. On a warm evening in the spring of 1920, they sat together on their porch as they had done thousands of times before. Gwendolyn was 73, Graham 75, and both were still sharp and active despite their age. They were watching the sunset paint the Kansas sky in shades of orange and pink. "You remember the first time I kissed you?" Graham asked suddenly. "Of course, after you proposed by the creek." Gwendolyn smiled at the memory. "I thought my heart was going to beat right out of my chest." "Mine too," Graham admitted. "I was terrified I had moved too fast, that you would realize you could do better than a poor cowboy. There was no one better than you. There never has been." Gwendolyn reached over and took his hand, the gesture as natural as breathing after 35 years of marriage. "You know what I think about sometimes? What would have happened if you had decided to take Rosie to a different town that day? What if you had gone to Abilene or waited for the traveling blacksmith?" "I don't think that was ever really an option," Graham said thoughtfully. "Something guided me to you that day. Call it fate or providence or just dumb luck, but I was always going to end up at your forge. We were always going to fall in love. This was always how our story was meant to go." "I like that idea," Gwendolyn said. "That we were inevitable." "We were inevitable," Graham confirmed. "From the moment I saw you carefully examining that horseshoe, so focused and competent and beautiful, I was a goner. I just didn't know it yet." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky darken and the first stars appear. Somewhere in the distance, they could hear the sound of horses in the pasture, including old Rosie, who had miraculously made it to 33 years old and was still going strong. "That mare really did save my life," Graham said, following Gwendolyn's gaze toward the pasture. "Not just that time in Colorado, but when she went lame and I brought her to you. She saved my life by introducing me to mine." "I should give her extra apples tomorrow," Gwendolyn joked. "We both should. She deserves a whole bushel for what she's given us." The years continued their gentle progression. Gwendolyn and Graham celebrated their 40th anniversary surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. The Forge empire had grown to 6 locations, all still operating under the principles Gwendolyn had established decades ago. Treat every horse gently, do quality work, and value integrity over profit. Rosie finally passed away peacefully at the age of 36, one of the longest-lived horses anyone in Newton could remember. They buried her in the pasture she had called home for over 3 decades, under a tree where she had liked to stand in the shade. Graham carved a wooden marker for her grave himself, the letters deep and clear. Rosie, beloved mare and unlikely matchmaker. She brought 2 hearts together and changed the world in the process. Graham began to slow down noticeably after Rosie's death. He was nearly 80, and though his mind was still sharp, his body was finally showing its age. He still went to the forge most days, but more to visit and advise than to work. Gwendolyn stayed close by his side, the two of them inseparable as they had always been. One afternoon in late autumn, they took a ride out to the creek where Graham had proposed so many years ago. It was difficult for Graham to mount his horse, but he insisted, saying he needed to see the spot one more time. They rode slowly, taking their time, and when they reached the familiar bend in the creek, they dismounted and sat on a blanket just as they had that transformative day in 1885. 40 years, Graham said, looking around at the landscape that had changed so little while they had changed so much. 40 years since I asked you to marry me right here. Best decision I ever made was saying yes, Gwendolyn replied. She was 77 now, her blonde hair gone silver, her hands marked by decades of hard work. But when she looked at Graham, she still saw the handsome cowboy who had treated her with respect when no one else would. I need you to promise me something, Graham said seriously. When I'm gone, and I know that day is coming sooner rather than later, I need you to promise you'll keep living. Really living, not just going through the motions. Don't talk about that, Gwendolyn protested, though they both knew the conversation was necessary. We have to talk about it, sweetheart. I'm 80 years old and I'm tired. My body is wearing out. Graham took her hand gently. But you still have years ahead of you, good years. I need to know you'll be all right. I'll be all right because I'll have 40 years of love and memories to sustain me, Gwendolyn said, tears slipping down her cheeks. You gave me everything, Graham. A partnership, a family, a life beyond anything I dreamed possible. When you're gone, I'll have our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. I'll have the business we built together. I'll have this creek and this town and a million moments stored in my heart. I'll be all right because you loved me, and that love will never fade. Graham pulled her close, and they held each other as the afternoon sun filtered through the autumn leaves. They stayed there for hours, talking about their life together, about their children and grandchildren, about the business and the forge and all the horses they had shoed over the decades. They laughed and cried and simply existed together in the place where their forever had begun. Graham passed away peacefully in his sleep 2 months later, just after Christmas of 1925. He was 80 years old, and he died in the bed he had shared with Gwendolyn for 40 years, her hand in his right up until the end. The funeral was massive, people coming from all over Kansas to pay their respects to a man who had been respected and loved by everyone who knew him. Gwendolyn grieved deeply, but she kept her promise. She continued living, finding purpose in her family and in the business that remained a testament to what she and Graham had built together. She spent time with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, telling them stories about their grandfather and about the day a cowboy brought his mare for treatment and ended up proposing marriage. She lived to be 92 years old, remaining sharp and engaged until the very end. When she finally passed away in 1939, peacefully in her sleep just as Graham had, her family knew exactly where to bury her. They laid her to rest beside Graham in the Newton Cemetery, under a simple headstone that read, Gwendolyn Emerson Dalton, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, and blacksmith. She shoed horses gently and loved fiercely. At her funeral, Marcus stood up to speak, now an old man himself at 63. He told the story that had become family legend about how his parents met, how a limping mare had brought together two souls who were meant to be one. He talked about the forge his mother had fought to keep running, the business empire she and his father had built together, and the legacy of integrity and quality that continued in 6 locations across Kansas. But most of all, he talked about love. About how his parents had shown him and his siblings what real partnership looked like. How they had worked together and supported each other, and remained deeply in love through 4 decades of marriage. How they had built not just a business but a family, not just a fortune but a legacy of love that would continue for generations. My mother used to say that the day my father walked into her forge was the luckiest day of her life, Marcus concluded, his voice thick with emotion. But my father always insisted he was the lucky one. The truth is, they were both lucky. Lucky to have found each other, lucky to have built the life they did, and lucky to have loved so completely. They gave us all a model of what marriage should be, what partnership should be, what love should be. And that is a gift that will never die. After the funeral, the family gathered at the forge. It was still operating, still thriving, still built on the foundation Gwendolyn and Graham had established over half a century ago. The sign still read, Emerson and Dalton Family Forge, and it would continue to bear those names for generations to come. In the back pasture, a new foal was testing out her legs, her mother watching protectively nearby. In the workshop, a great-grandson was carefully shaping a horseshoe under the guidance of Clara, now 73 herself, and still working metal with the skill her father had taught her. In the office, Marcus was going over the books, making sure the business his parents had built would continue to thrive. And in the hearts of everyone who had been touched by Gwendolyn and Graham's love story, there was a warmth that would never fade. A reminder that love could bloom in unexpected places, that partnership and respect were the foundation of any lasting relationship, and that sometimes, just sometimes, a limping mare and a gentle touch could change the course of history. The Emerson and Dalton family forge continued to operate well into the 21st century, passed down through 6 generations. And every person who worked there knew the story of how it began, with a blacksmith's daughter who shoed horses gently, and a cowboy who brought his mare and his marriage proposal.